You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another edition of Assembly Call. I think we're still calling it radio, where we discuss the most important topics of the world of Indiana basketball. It is the 1076th episode overall of the Assembly Call. It's recorded on the evening of March 26th, 2025. I am your host, the coach, Brian Tonsoni. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call, how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Smart takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
This week's banner moment is all about the new start. Indiana basketball, as all of us know, has a new leader in place, Coach Darian DeVries. In the past week, there have been plenty of discussions on this hire on social media, YouTube, and various podcasts. The debate will continue until the ball is tipped next November, when we will get to see the results. Many in Hoosierland had their own personal list of favorites to be the next Indiana coach. Coach DeVries probably was not on many of those lists, but regardless of those personal wish lists, it seems like Indiana has hired a ball coach, a guy who is described as a grinder, a competitor, and a tireless worker. We have seen videos of modern offensive basketball, of solid defense, and dissected his past winning records at Drake and West Virginia. Time will tell, and there are no guarantees. But what Indiana has hired is someone who it seems has a vastly different philosophy of college coaching than the previous regimes. Not only is this a new coach with the new roster, but a completely new approach. This was needed. Now we can all get behind Coach DeVries and wish him the best. After all, this is Indiana, and we must find our way back to consistent winning. Coach DeVries has a plan, and it seems like a good start to get back to winning. Okay, now let me introduce co-hosts. We'll have them all on the show at some point. The two, well, I'm still a parent, but they're out of the house. But the others have some parental duties. But with me now is senior editor at the Sports Illustrated, a self-renowned shot doctor, still looking for patients to help correct their shots. It's Ryan Phillips.
Analyzing players, finding every wrinkle. He hasn't ever hosted, never lifted a finger. He's got all the
Well, let me quickly add just one thing about this.
Dude just interrupted his own jingle.
All right, Ryan, it's time to rant or celebrate or do whatever, but it's yours.
First of all, I haven't heard that song in quite some time. But no, I think that, we're seeing a real changing of the guard with regard to the basketball program. As we said, like, as many have said, like, there's not a roster right now. Cue it, Eddie. You can do it now. It's but he's got a soundbite he really wants to play.
Now, I met with the team. There is no team.
There you go. So, we're kind of in this weird in-between phase where we don't know what the roster is going to look like, and we don't know what the new coach is going to do. What I can say is this is going to be different than the last 4 years and probably the last 8 years, significantly in some cases. I think that the recruiting piece of things is going to be very, very different. And I think that, one of the things that's been missing from Indiana with both of the last two coaches is the ability to connect with recruits and create long-term relationships, which is a huge part of recruiting. And I would, modern recruiting especially, everybody can pay money. Everybody can, talk about the system they're going to put you in and show you videos that line up and everything like that. But relationships are the key, not just relationships with the player, but relationships with the families, relationships with programs, AAU programs. And I think that's something that has maybe been underestimated by the last two head coaches in Indiana. Tom Crean was really good at it. That was one of the things that he leaned on a lot when Indiana wasn't very good and was able to get recruits. I think that is going to be something that Darian DeVries is going to be very good at and is going to work very hard at. And I think that that's a piece of Indiana basketball that has always been there for the length of the time that the program has existed until the last 8 years. And I think that his ability to do that and on what level will determine how successful he is. We know he knows how to coach. We know he knows how to put an offense together. We know he knows how to put a defense together. He's been at great programs that have been run exceptionally well. He's built programs. It's really going to be about the players he gets to fit his system. And I also think over the last 4 years, certainly Indiana's been really good at getting talent, but not at building a team. And that has shown late, early season, pieces don't fit together. It's like we need time to fit them together. By the end of the season, sometimes you figure it out and they're playing well, but it's too late. And that's something that I think Darian DeVries will be very good at too, is building not just a group of talented people, but pieces that fit together and fit his system and fit what he wants to do. And on top of that, fitting his system to the players he gets. So that's the big thing. I mean, we can talk, there's some Mike Woodson retrospective in the tease for this show. We can talk about that. I don't think this is going to be a dumping on Mike Woodson session. We're not here to do that. Plenty has been said in that regard either. It's not our time to pile on the guy. He's gone now, and we're looking forward to a new segment. We can talk about that in contrast to what I think is going to be coming. And, from all reports, DeVries has hit the ground running and is contacting a lot of people. He's already, starting to angle and putting together staff. There have been some really exciting names attached to Indiana as far as staff members, and we'll see what he does moving forward.
So all that, we got a lot on this episode in the 3 segments. Segment 1, we're going to talk about that roster, the outgoing, the incoming, and whether that should be a concern or not. A little bit about the coaching staff that we've heard. Segment 2 is our main segment this evening, and we're going to just break down what we've heard about a variety of things offensively, defensively, and just general thoughts, again, of the new hire. And then segment 3, there's some interesting Indiana scheduling thoughts heading into next year and in the offseason. And then we'll just finish with some general NCAA tournament talk about what teams from the Big Ten or what teams overall will possibly make the Final Four, and we'll call it a show. But all of that is coming up this week on Assembly Call Radio. But first, let's talk about our presenting sponsor.
Home field apparel, wear one for the team.
This edition of Assembly Call Radio, just like all shows on the Back Home Network, is presented by our friends at Home Field Apparel, where they have the largest collection of vintage IU apparel that you'll find anywhere. And it's not just IU. Home Field has unique, interesting designs printed on the softest, most comfortable fabrics for over 150 colleges and universities, plus plenty of other brands like Little 5, IndyCar, The Fever, and more. And they're always expanding and trying something new. They have the mystery boxes. The Corso sweater is one of my favorites of all time. Put it on to celebrate the new beginning tonight. And the only downside with Home Field's ever-expanding popularity is sometimes the best stuff sells out quickly. So if you want to have a shot at getting stuff when it's released, you need to follow them on social media, subscribe to their texts and emails, and make sure you're staying up to date so you don't miss anything. I've done a good job of avoiding Home Field. I don't know that this is the right spot to say it, because I've spent an extraordinarily large amount of money on Home Field and need to buy some new appliances and take care of the house. But I will be back into Home Field real soon. But those of you who do have some extra cash hanging around, go to homefieldapparel.com. Use our promo code HOME23 to get 15% off your entire first order. That's promo code HOME23 for 15% off. Once again, the website is homefieldapparel.com. Wear one for the team. So a few Hoosier headlines. There's a lot of media that's been out there. We're joining the throw. Crimson Cast has some things out there. X's and Joe's put out a really good podcast last Wednesday. Coach Adranya, a nice breakdown of offense and defense from Coach DeVries. The Hoosier Connect interview, which we will share some of those clips tonight in our conversation. So if you haven't seen those yet and you can't get enough of this new hire and this new start for Indiana basketball, we suggest that you go and take a listen at those, as well as all the rest of our Back Home Network media and podcast. We're going to focus on the portal right now. Tucker is the only Bryson Tucker's the only one officially still on the roster. Luke Goody is trying to get an extra year. Gabe Cupps has committed to Ohio State. The others, we do not know where they are headed at this point. And then, obviously, at the end of our show tonight, we'll talk about Michigan, Michigan State, Maryland, Purdue, and other teams in the tournament, as March Madness is right in the middle of that. So, the portal, you hinted about it. We had the clip from Coach Cal. There is no team. Eddie, if you would share some of Coach DeVries' thoughts, quick thoughts on the portal.
Yeah, biggest thing is a lot of phone calls, and then your conversations and trying to get the best read you can from people that know them, people around them. Sometimes you maybe had a previous relationship, sometimes you don't. So you got to put a lot of information together in a short period of time, and then just kind of trust your gut, with it. After doing this for now 27 years, you start to get a feel for kids and what they're about and what they talk about, what's important to them, and you can get a real sense of what their priorities are and their motivation for wanting to potentially come to your school, and then after that you hope you did enough and you put it together and then you go make it work.
So there's a lot wrapped up in that short clip. There was a lot of stuff that he mentioned early on about doing the work and not cutting corners with recruits. And the quote from, I think, the press conference for me was, "You're not getting a collection of talent, but you're building a team." And so in the last week, I'm sure Coach DeVries has been on the phone, Ryan, just calling and interviewing not only the players, but their families, the coaches that have had these kids, to try to get a reaction on what he wants inside his program. And I think that kind of shows, again, when he's met with some Indiana players and the Indiana players are choosing to go, that there's just a mutual agreement that the program's going in a different direction, is why you've seen a lot of outgoing. And these portal things take a little time to get some incoming results. But your thoughts on that clip and other things that Coach DeVries has hinted upon here in this last week about how to operate in the portal and how to build a team in transition?
Well, I think first of all, we don't know if guys are going to leave. I mean, guys are entering the portal. We're not 100% sure they're going to leave. I think that's fair. A lot of guys are exploring their options. Some will definitely leave. There's no question. I don't know how many. We do know that Tucker DeVries is going to come. I think it's pretty safe to say someone like Connor Enright's probably going to come as well. I'm not breaking any news there. It's just connecting dots that most people are already connecting. Tucker DeVries is definitely coming. We know that for a fact. And Luke Goody is trying to stay and get a fifth year. Gabe Cupps has already gone to Ohio State, and some other guys are on their way out as well. I just think that we're going to have to wait to see this play out. I think that he's right. I think it's about building a team. It's about making sure the pieces fit together as opposed to just having a load of talent. I would assume some of the people from West Virginia, some of his recruits may be joining as well, depending on who he brings staff wise. I mean, I think it hasn't been reported, but the feeling is that it's going to be a complete reset staff wise. And I don't think he's bringing his entire West Virginia staff with him. I think he's going to go out and shoot for some higher level assistants. I would assume some people are coming with him, or someone is coming with him. We've already know the strength coach is coming. Some basketball operations people are probably coming. And then on top of that, I would assume at least, I don't know about the assistants, the main assistants, but there have been some things connecting him to higher level stuff. So when you bring in those people, they bring in their relationships with with recruits, with transfer kids, stuff like that. And so that changes what you're doing as well. So I think that it's going to be, really, we don't know anything yet. But I think that his philosophy is certainly more team-based than individual-based. And I think that that's something that is going to impact the way that he goes out and gets players. And he might not get the highest rated guy, but he's going to get the guy that fits what he wants to do and also will work with the other players he already has. And I think this gets lost at times, is that the number one job of a college basketball coach is to win college basketball games. It's not to create NBA players. It's not to collect the most talent. It's not to, have the most guys in the NBA. Those are all byproducts and they're great, but he's here to win games. And sometimes you win by not getting the most talented guy. You get by getting the best college basketball player, which are not necessarily the same people. And so I think that that's his focus, and it's nice to see that that's going to be his focus moving forward. And it's the thing he's done at 2 different programs, and he did a lot of while he was at Creighton as an assistant. So I think that's what I took away from most of what he was talking about, not just in that clip, but in the entire interview.
It is a point where a lot of us have gotten to like college basketball and fall in love with Indiana basketball at a time where people leaving was a signal that there was problems. And then if a lot of people left, that meant you didn't have a lot of players left over, and that was not a good time. But we live in a new era of college basketball, and total rebuilds happen when there are new coaches, and there are total rebuilds even when veteran coaches. Illinois had 10 new players last year by decision of the head coach. So that is something that I've had to overcome, Ryan, is that, back in the day when you heard people were transferring out, what was the reason why? Were they not happy about playing time? Was it something the coach said or did? And really, the stress level should be lower with fans when you see these young kids going to the portal for 2 reasons. One, I think it's advantageous for any athlete when the portal is what it is to go in and see, unless you are absolutely happy where you're at, to see your true value right now. It's really a business decision. I have no problem with people going in, and if they choose to come back, we'll be very supportive of them. The portal is an opportunity now that a lot of players didn't have over the years. And the second thing for me to try to relax a little bit is you can turn this around. Coach DeVries, back before the NIL and the portal, built Drake up in the first year with junior college transfers, graduate transfers, and freshmen. Now the game has changed, and he went to West Virginia, and he won 19 games in his first year with a total rebuild with very small amounts of returning production coming back. So while you always, you look at different things, he's had experience in doing this. He's going to have a team of 10 or 11. We are going to have to understand that and be okay with that, and we won't know for sure what that's going to look like until some of these names start popping in. Your thoughts on how we as fans should kind of look at, we shouldn't panic, should we, when we see all of these young men going into the portal?
Not at all. I mean, I think that any time there's changeover in college basketball, you're gonna get this kind of thing. I mean, there may have been nobody on the roster last year who fits what he wants to do. I doubt that's the case, but guys are going to go assess their value. It's like right now, if you have plans on being in the NBA, there is no downside to declaring for the draft, going through the draft process, and then coming back now, as you are allowed to do that. Zero downside to doing that, unless your school tells you there's not a spot for you when you come back. But that's usually not what happens, because if you're good enough to be doing that, you're probably good enough to, for the coach to want to keep you on the team. So I think that when players go into the portal, the downside is they might leave. The upside is they can be replaced with a better player, especially in college basketball these days. With college football, I think it's harder to do because of scheme fits and all of that. And that's true in college basketball, but to a lesser extent. If a nose tackle goes into the portal, not every college football team uses a true nose tackle. So he may not fit what you're doing. But, if a guard who can shoot goes in, everybody can use one of those. It's just easier to find fits, I think, in college basketball. So no, I don't think, I think this is expected. Whenever there's a new coach, guys are going to jump in the portal. They don't know how that fit. This isn't the guy who recruited them. This isn't any of that stuff. They are going to go look for their best opportunity. Their best opportunity, some of them, could be to stay at Indiana. They don't know this guy. He just got here. They will have meetings. They will discuss. If he's already at the point where, hey, I've already know what I'm going to import and you just don't fit what we're doing, I think you should go find your best opportunity. That's good for Indiana. You don't want a guy who doesn't fit on the team. It's a waste of a roster spot. So there's going to be some give and take here. Yes, it's alarming to see guys you have followed and rooted for gone. It is. But on the flip side, it is also a great opportunity to bring in players who are going to fit this new coach's system and who are to create players you're going to root for more or again or whatever, and create that winning culture. So it's hard to watch guys leave, but it's really fun to watch guys come, show up on campus. So we'll see what happens. But again, a lot of teams are facing similar situations to Indiana at this point, and it'll sort itself out. Indiana will have a roster next year, and it'll have a roster, I think, that will be expected to do some things. I'm not saying they're not going to win a national championship in year one. I don't think, but they're going to be in a situation where it's going to be a competitive team, and they're going to have a roster together, and then that's going to be the first year towards building to something bigger.
Hey, this is a good time to bring in Andy Bottoms has joined us now. As we end segment one here, we're talking about the portal. And in segment two, we're going to talk a little bit about what we've heard from Coach DeVries about offense and defense. So, Andy, first of all, welcome to the show. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing good. Accomplished some good things with 8th grade algebra homework before I was able to hop on. So really feeling good about myself.
Right in the flow. Great warm up for the show.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You got to keep your mind sharp.
People think roster construction in the NIL time is difficult. Try doing some 8th grade math. That's a little more time consuming. But Andy, the last question we have is the roster. He talked about shooting. He's talked about different types of players. It's hard to know exactly what the roster is going to look like, but do you have a general idea from what he said in this past week of what the roster is going to look like and how it might be different than what we've seen in the past few years?
I think when you look back at what he's done and kind of what he talks about, I think you can at least get a sense of what he values. Now, the flip side of that is, I think, last year, as we think about what he was able to do at West Virginia, he really had to make a kind of hard right turn partway through the season as both his son and another player, I forget the guy's name, but they lost another player early on who was expected to be one of their key rotation guys. And so they really had to turn themselves into being a lot more defensive minded. They really put a lot on Javon Small, and he responded in a big way. And so I think that's the one thing that gives me, early confidence, regardless of how the roster comes together, is that he was able to not, just within the season be able to make adjustments to kind of make the most of the personnel that he has. But I think from what you hear, and I think it was Tony's breakdown that talked about this a little bit of, he does want to have, guys who can stretch the floor, who are playing at the 4 spot. Maybe it was Bob and Mike on their X's and Joe's direction. Maybe it was both. And the 5-man is more of like a rim protector, but doesn't do a lot of straight post ups and things like that. And so I think IU's had some guys like that at various points in the past. And so I think you kind of understand from that generally what he's looking for from a guy inside, to be a good rebounder, shot blocker, rim protector, be able to get some putback baskets, but not necessarily a guy who's going to be inside doing the, posting up a lot, going to be a guy who's out setting ball screens and doing things like that and kind of putting guys on the move in that regard. And then really prioritizes shooting and particularly guys on the wing. Seems like in terms of guys who can attack and are a little bit more versatile there. And that really, as much as anything in recent years, has been kind of a spot that IU's really struggled to fill guys in. I think you think about a guy like Mbako, probably too big to really fit that kind of true wing role, wasn't quite, foot speed wasn't quite there in some of those things. So I think had aspects of what he would like, but maybe not the exact definition of that. And that may lead to, him, his decision to go in the portal. I kind of caught the tail end of that conversation. I think there's lots of reasons these guys would do that. Some of which may be they don't feel like they're a fit for what he's doing. Some of it may just be looking for different opportunities. But I think, when you think about some of the wing scorers that we've seen other teams in the Big Ten have, and feels like that's just been a blind spot for IU. It's not that they haven't tried to recruit those guys, but guys who are pretty versatile, can step out and shoot, but also really attack off the dribble from that, 6'6", 6'7" type size. Just don't feel like there's been a lot of those guys lately. So I think that's, something that you're going to see. And obviously based on what he did with Javon Small last year, I think you're going to see him I think from a point guard perspective, there's some specific things that he's going to be looking for as well, both defensively in terms of applying pressure on the ball, but also trying to get the ball up the floor quickly. He's talked so much about, wanting to get shots early in the shot clock. Taylor Lehman from Bite Size Bison, for those who subscribe to that, had some things about his offense and the quick shots and things like that. So I think you get a sense of what he values enough to know the kinds of guys he's looking for at different positions. And hopefully he goes out and finds guys that fit those descriptions to a T. But again, I kind of fall back a little bit on last year of this is a guy who found additional ways to make it work without the benefit of being able to just go out and get new players, but really having to kind of adjust on the fly. And I think that's the kind of thing that hopefully, again, some of that will be earned with IU fans over time that aren't familiar with him. But I think that's the kind of thing that will eventually, if it bears out at IU, will really help build trust. I think this was probably a couple years ago having some of these conversations, and it was I borrowed this from an Eagles podcast I listened to 2 years ago when they were, really floundered toward the end of the season. And it's like players know when coaches don't have the answer. And so I think what you look at with him as a guy who was able to provide those answers in difficult situations in a new setting last year. And to me, that's one of the things that gives me some real optimism about what he can do.
You bring up a good point. Shooting. I think we're going to see a lot more shooters and things run for the three-point ball a lot. But he also had to make a change with his son. At Drake, he could put his son more in one-on-one positions, be a high-volume player. He had to bring him off the move a little bit more when he went to a league that was more competitive than the Missouri Valley. Nothing against the Missouri Valley, but you got to do a lot of things differently in the Big 12. And he made some adjustments. And then you're absolutely right. Then when his son goes down and the other starter goes down, then he has to do some things differently. And you want to have a strong philosophy, but you also want to be able to adapt. And you add to it what was said at the press conference about winning close games, those abilities to think on the fly and make some decisions. I think you're onto something there. But coming up here on the next segment of Assembly Call Radio, we're going to discuss some more offense and defensive philosophy of what we've heard briefly. So stick with us here on the Assembly Call.
What's going on? It's Christian Wofford. What's the only thing better than an epic buzzer beater? Celebrating it with friends afterwards. Join my guys Jerod, Andy, Ryan, and Coach on the Assembly Call after every IU game. Go Hoosiers.
All right, welcome back to the Assembly Call. I'm the coach, Brian Tonsoni. We have Ryan Phillips, who was on, will be popping back on again. Andy Bottom joining us. And we're just talking about the new ball coach at Indiana, Darian DeVries, and what we have heard. That's all we have to go about these days is kind of what we see on some of the podcasts, what we see in the interviews and media, and we're all anxious to try to get our fingers on exactly what we're going to see. And anytime you make a change, you're really fired up and enthused. But Eddie, our producer, has cut some videos from the Hoosier Connect podcast. We thank them for the videos. And we're going to share some of those, and then I'll ask Andy and Ryan some thoughts about those videos. But it seems like Coach is here. He's working hard. He's got a makeshift office right now until his office gets ready. And he's working. He's been found around in Bloomington, and he was asked about what it's like to be in Bloomington.
Yeah, it's. I mean, you can feel it even as you go around town, and the excitement that people have when they come up and say hello. It kind of just glows, off of people that they love.
Have you been
Hoosiers.
recognized yet? That's cool.
Oh yeah, it's yeah.
So. Again, welcome to Bloomington, Coach DeVries, and welcome to what a lot of us think is a great fan base, a very passionate fan base. Some people find it to be a fishbowl or whatever it is, but welcome. Andy, I haven't had a chance to talk to you and just get your general thoughts on this new start for Indiana basketball and the general thoughts on Coach DeVries' announcement last week as our new head coach?
Yeah, I think, like anybody, I think, I shouldn't say like anybody. I think like most of us on the show, at least, my, despite having been burned by some of these others, it's, my default setting is to be optimistic about what he's going to be able to do. And I think as you look back at what he was able to accomplish at Drake and the turnaround that he had there, I think back a lot to what Mike had talked about in terms of, has the guy set the all-time wins record at that place. And I think he ended up tying what Keno Davis had done. But if you look at the track record of what was there before he got there, and the the ascent that they had while he was there, and the ability to sustain that, and then seeing, as I alluded to, some of the things that he was able to do at West Virginia only in 1 year, and certainly felt like, you and I could certainly debate this, but certainly felt like they deserved to be in the tournament. And don't need to get into all that, but under difficult circumstances, had them in a tough league that's got a number of teams in the Sweet 16, was able to be really competitive there and play well. So I think what you have is a guy who, if you compare it to the last couple hires, at least Archie was definitely the hot name. I was excited about that. So you can't, we could all turn around and say, hey, we were excited about this and it didn't work out. I think some of the things that have kind of come out, even lately, as they're trying to make comparisons between DeVries and Miller and kind of what was Dayton in the 4 years before Archie was there, and what did he do, essentially sustain that versus what DeVries did. That's definitely a hindsight being 2020 scenario. Nobody cared about that, when he came. And so I think you kind of look at that one in retrospect as a guy who, really struggled to get things going offensively, struggled with the spotlight that came along with the job and things like that. And then you had Woodson, that was kind of a surprise hire, in that wasn't really on a lot of people's radar, came in. I think everybody was trying to be optimistic about that, talk themselves into it and say, hey, this is an IU guy. He understands, he's got the MBA, and he can bring some of that to Bloomington. And there were certainly high points where it looked like it was going the right direction, and others where it just wasn't. And so now you kind of look, and to me, I'm trying to compare what DeVries has really done. And I think what you have is a guy who's proven to be a winner over the course of a number of years, has done it in a couple different leagues in different ways. And while he wasn't at West Virginia long, I still was pretty impressed what he was able to do there. And I think he's certainly not as flashy as some of the other names that were out there. And there are names that you could have thrown out that I'd have been more excited to get than him. But I think as you really dig into him a little bit, I think there is reason for optimism. I think he seems like what he values in his team. And I think one of the answers he gave in terms of, how are you going to know that the team is doing what you want? And he talked a lot about, playing hard and with enthusiasm and moving the ball and things like that. Like, if that stuff comes to fruition, then they probably are playing well, I think. So I'm optimistic about it. Everything sounds great until you see a product on the floor, but I'm optimistic that it's a guy with a different kind of track record than what has come in. And I think a little bit more that you can look on and say, okay, this guy's had some impressive stints and seasons and things like that, where he kind of built something from virtually nothing at Drake. And so I think those things are at least the reasons I'm positive about it. Definitely not a win the press conference guy. And I don't know that you need that. Again, you're trying to figure out what all you need and don't need. I think everybody wants to compare it to Signetti. I think he needed to bring a different, and he said that. He goes, this isn't how I normally would have operated, but everything was so downtrodden. I needed to say some things to fire people up. I don't know that you need that with the basketball program, because there's inherent enthusiasm for that. And so I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, that it isn't a rah-rah guy. It isn't, those things. That I think he really just loves basketball and is going to try to play the right way and bring a winner. And so we'll see what happens.
I think you mentioned a lot of good things there that I agree with. One was that last statement on the rah-rah. He came in and he said what he needed to say, and he went to work. I think that is what Indiana basketball needed. We had the Indiana guy. It didn't work out. We had the up-and-coming guy. That didn't work out. And there was no need to shout, oh, this is going to be the next guy to bring banners and have music and whatever else you have at press conferences. What Indiana basketball needs is stability, and stability with winning. And he is tasked with getting us there, and he has to get us there. And I, too, I went through the same thing with you. I was really excited for Archie and let down with his struggles. I was very, very hesitant with Woodson, but tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. And that turned out not to work. So I've been both excited and hesitant, and now I'm ready for whatever I'm feeling to just make sure it works out and there's winning again, right? And so the fresh start for me has really got me reinvigorated about Indiana basketball, which I had lost over the last year and a half. That's probably more my issues than anything else, but the grinder, the worker, as you mentioned, I think really represents what the core values of Indiana basketball is. So, Eddie, let's talk a little bit behind the scenes there. Throw the offensive video, what he said, and then we'll talk about a little bit about offense.
I think offensively, like we really take a lot of pride on kind of making that one extra pass. So whether it's out of the set play, it's kind of that hockey assist, if you will, of like when our teams are really rolling offensively, you'll see the ball popping from side to side and ending in, either hopefully a 3-point shot, maybe it's a back door that's been drawn up or something, and playing off of what our team's strengths are. But overall, just that overall unselfishness of a group of guys, and you can see it, and there's no hesitation that they'll make that extra pass to a teammate because they know they'll get it back on the next possession. Yeah.
Unselfishness. Again, words are words, and actions matter more than words. So we need to wait until November. But there's so much in that clip as an old ball coach that I just love. And then when you go back and watch Coach Adranya's breakdown, you will see what he means by the one more pass. You'll see about the unselfishness. You'll see about what he says about the ball coming back. All of that together for me, Andy, speaks team basketball. It also speaks, some of the other stuff is more modern basketball, scoring early, shooting the three-pointer, watching it. His teams take 30-foot, threes and splashing them down. It's different than what we've seen the last 4 years. But the unselfish play, you see it in the clips of what he's trying to do. I think that will be a fresh viewing experience for our friends. Your thoughts, again, we have just limited information, but your thoughts on what we might see offensively under Coach DeVries.
Yeah, I think, as you said, Tony broke it down really well, and you do see some of the things that he's talking about there. I think one thing that I go back to is, and you have brought this up many times, the whole idea of one more passing and things like that. And I think as we brought it up in recent years, and I think this was a little bit of the NBA mentality that Woodson brought, was there was a lot of isolation or pick and roll where it was a couple guys, and you weren't really, as you watch other teams that are constantly get somebody in the paint, kick it out, force them to react, get back in the paint, kick it out to somebody else. Some of those kinds of, ball movement and passing things just wasn't, I don't want to say that passing wasn't part of the offensive philosophy, but the way that things were run, you didn't see that a lot. And so when we called out that one more passing, it was called out more as the anomaly than as the feature of the offense. And I think that, again, based on the words, as you said, feels in line to change with the way that he wants to do things. But I think, again, there's been a track record of being able to do that and show that. So I think you're going to see a lot of what people have been clamoring for in terms of, more of a 4-out game. Talked about the way he uses the 5 spot, having more guys that can stretch the floor, his son, Tucker, chief among those. And so I think you are going to see a bit more of that, bit more pace, ball movement. And so I think if that comes to fruition, the way that he talked about it, that's will certainly be a welcome thing. And I think that's where you talked about the kind of team component of that. I think that goes back a lot to some of the comments he's made about roster building and things like that, where, paraphrasing, but you're not just kind of accumulating talent. You got to make sure that it all fits together. And I think that means fitting together both from what positions guys are playing, but also from a mentality and what they value. And in that interview, he talked about some of those things and kind of a little bit of what he looks for. And the kinds of traits and things like that they're really looking at. So I do think all of that is kind of underscored by the team concept that you mentioned at the top.
And defensively, again, until we get film, until we see what's going on, we really don't know. We can just guess, and that's what we're doing because we're excited about the new start. But they were, I believe, a top 15 team in KenPom defensive efficiency this year, Andy. And I thought under 30% at the rate at the 3-point. And that statistics are statistics, and they can be manipulated and they can be used for interpretation. But again, when you go back and add that to the film breakdown we see from Tourney, and you see defensively players staying closer to shooters, the scouting report stuff that Tourney said, I think you're going to see more cohesive team defense that I know Coach Woodson wanted, but it seemed like it never, either the players or whatever, it never seemed to gel where they got on that after year one. Year one was their best defensive under Woodson. It never seemed to gel. And that's something I think is going to be very important for Coach DeVries to win in the Big Ten, is to get that implemented as soon as possible, because yes, you need to score points, but you also need to be able to stop people at key moments. Any thoughts about what you've heard from him about what we might see differently on the defensive end?
I think main things have been really talking about ball pressure. I know people have thrown out the pack line. I hope somebody from a media relations standpoint is urging him to not under any circumstances echo the term pack line in any type of media or fan-based setting, just for, his own safety probably. But I think there are principles of that can make sense and be successful. And like I said, he was known, as you look at his efficiency numbers, really known as an offensive coach. And again, I hate to put too much into 1 year at West Virginia, but it's lots of small sample sizes of things like that. But really being able to kind of reinvent themselves in a way that their defense is what kind of kept them in games while they worked through some of the other challenges they had from a roster standpoint, I think is impressive. And so I think being able to figure out how to be effective defensively with different personnel sets is going to be important, because what he wants to do may not work in some Big Ten games and different things like that. So I probably know or have less strong feelings about some of what you'll see from him defensively. But I think the adaptability that he showed a year ago is a positive sign.
So the next thing is the GM position. We're seeing these positions being filled across the country. It was mentioned today in an article that it's likely to have a GM-like position, whether it's titled GM or not. But it would probably be one of the last things that may be announced on his coaching staff. And we kind of hinted in the early that we don't know who's coming and who's not. We found out today that they're going to try to make an announcement once the whole staff is put together instead of individual hires saying yes. But I'm sure, Andy, he's got 2 or 3 guys that are working with him that have said yes, that are either coming from him from West Virginia, already said yes. They're probably already in Bloomington. It just hasn't been officially announced. But your thoughts on NIL and the need for a general manager position, just in general, maybe for Indiana, but just in general in the college game?
You've definitely seen more people take that approach. I would probably be disingenuous to say that I know what all that role really entails. But I think what you're trying to do in any of it is let the coach focus on the things that are most important for them to do, and this GM can work through some of the other aspects of it, which in that regard makes a lot of sense, right? Like the coaches are obviously dealing with the same, in-game and preparation things they were before, and they've kind of layered on top of that all the different roster building NIL that has kind of magnified itself in such a way that now has to take up more of their time, at least at certain points of the season. So if all that somebody said was this GM role is able to figure out ways to take some of that off the head coach's plate, sounds like a great idea. You're obviously trying to figure out who is a good fit for that, and what is the skill set that you really need for somebody to be effective. Is it somebody who has that coaching experience, or does that really have nothing to do with it? And you're looking for somebody more from a administration standpoint or different things like that. So I think that's kind of the black box part of it for me, is you don't really know what that person is doing, but I see the need for someone who can help distribute the burden of all the things that the coach is being asked to do in the current state of things.
I look at it as a GM is a 365-day position. You are watching players and trying to predict who might be in the portal next year and trying to identify all of that stuff. As you said, like during the season, you're planning for Northwestern and Purdue scouting reports, and you're planning for practice. It's nice to have someone who's out there saying, doing all that behind the scenes work, because there are no rules right now, and you got to either be part of it and be looking at players. And I'm not a proponent of contacting players while they're in the season, but we know that stuff's going on. But if you're not up to date with who might pop on the portal, if you wait till the first day of the portal and 750 names go in and you're starting to sift through all those, I think you're way behind. And so a program that's going to benefit in the portal has to be active in the portal 365 days, and that's just too much for a coach to handle. I think the GM position, and almost like a scouting department that has a list on the wall of all potential players that fit our program. If they pop, here's the guys in priority, so that when they pop on that first day, you can if you wait that long, I'm not sure any coaching staff even waits that long anymore from what I've heard. And the last thing, Andy, you're a youth coach. I'm an old coach. We love practice. There was a few things that he was asked about practice.
I just believe like you want to try to practice how you want them to play. High intensity, very fast paced, not a lot of downtime within our practices and even in drills. Like if we're doing a specific drill for, maybe we're working on covering back doors, we don't need to do it for 10 minutes. We'll do it for 2 minutes, get it multiple reps, and just always reinforcing it and stuff, but not hanging with it so long that now they're practicing it and they kind of get
practicing the drill.
Practicing the drill, and they get bored with it a little bit. Yeah. So we want to practice it as game rep as possible, short and quick, do it right, and then let's get on to the next thing.
To me, again, the plan seems like a good plan. We'll see the results of the plan once we get some wins and losses out. But that is just it's coach speak for me. It's what you emphasize, and he said that we can get a lot done in 2 minutes, and then. There was an earlier interview where he said we do the same drill at the first minute of every practice on footwork so we don't travel and we can start drives the right way. Those are things that I know that good coaches do and have built into their program, and I'm not insinuating that Coach Woodson didn't have them. But it's usually what you emphasize is what you get, and it sounds like to me he has an idea of how to get that done in practice, and that's part of that refreshing new start for me. Even though he wasn't on my list at all, but once you start looking and listening to him, these are the little things that make this old ball coach a lot more optimistic. Your thoughts on that clip or anything that he said about practice?
Yeah, I think this was the area as much as anything that reminded me of some of the comments Signetti's made. He that was one of his big things was, hey, we're going to go really hard for this amount of time, but I'm not going to keep guys here for the sake of keeping them here. And some of the practices he had multiple. I think it was in the first interview he did with Hoosiers Connect, but I think he also brought it up on some of the other shows he's done, just in terms of how he had everything planned out so that it was efficient. You were going hard, but not for as long, and really kind of running guys into the ground. And I think DeVries made a similar comment in one of his. It was probably right around, that point in the video, at least in terms of what his philosophy is about that. So, again, it all sounds good, and probably would be saying the same thing no matter who they hired. So maybe that's not a fair way to think of it, but it definitely that was certainly an area. That was certainly an area that was reminiscent to me of some of the things that Signetti said about trying to have things well planned, be efficient, and be smart with the time that he's using and try to maximize what they're getting out of the practice time they have.
So if you want to see some of this in play, go watch Coach Tony Adragna's video breakdown of his West Virginia stuff. Is really, really good. I've watched it a couple times, and you'll see some of the stuff that Andy and I have talked about. But so that's going to do it for segment 2. When we come back, we're going to briefly hit on some scheduling things, talk a little bit of NCAA, and then we're going to send you on your way as I'm on spring break and I have some things that I want to do late at night and have some fun. And Andy's probably got some more math homework to do. So we'll be with you. So stick with us here on the Assembly Call.
What's up, y'all? It's Devontae Green giving you the green light to watch Assembly Call after every IU game. Just don't listen to their opinions about shot selection. Remember, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Go Hoosiers.
Welcome back to the Assembly Call. I'm Coach Brian Tonsoni. I'm here with Andy Bottoms. Jerod Morris will be joining us soon to end up the segment. I guess we're going to extend it a little bit once he gets on because he has a lot to say. But it's now time. We don't have a mailbag, but if you do have a question in the chat and we can catch it and producer Eddie can throw it our way, we'll try to answer it. But briefly, Andy, schedule next year, Marquette and Kentucky, and it sounded like Coach DeVries wants to add a couple more bigger games to the schedule. We've always talked about that, and we'll talk about it when the schedule comes out. 4 or 5 marquee games are pretty good in order to try to build some equity up in the non-conference. I think that might have hurt Indiana's resume this year. And there's talk of a foreign trip. Every 4 years a school can go. Coach DeVries took his West Virginia team last year. That resets once he gets to IU, it's by the school. And so that's a good way when you have to rebuild a roster with 10 or 11 new faces. You get some extra practices in the summer and you get to go play some games and get some stuff figured out a little bit. Your thoughts in general, what he said about adding teams on the schedule and a foreign trip?
I think the foreign trip is a great idea given the circumstances and giving them, as you said, some extra practice time and game reps with what's going to be a totally new group of players. And so I think you see a lot of times newer coaches will try to take advantage of this to get a little bit of a jump start on that. So I think that makes a ton of sense to me. In terms of the rest of the schedule, yeah, he seemed to want to be pretty aggressive in that regard. Yeah, I think you're looking at, I think among the challenges of trying to do that for IU right now is, so you're not in, you're not in a, Atlantis or a Maui or whatever. So you don't have one of those kinds of settings. So how do you get yourself into a couple other kind of standalone games that aren't necessarily part of a multi-day event as you get into it, especially where there isn't a Big Ten SEC or Big Ten ACC challenge and things like that. You don't have that at your disposal. So trying to figure out where you get some of those games, where at least before you had a few of those built in, but it seemed like a good philosophy. I think one thing that IU did a good job of last year in the non-conference is that a lot of the teams that they did play in the bye games ended up being quad 3 games, ended up being some of the better, better mid-major teams. They played a couple SoCon teams, and that's a league that's usually pretty good. So I do think there's some carryover stuff for the other games that you're going to fill in around the marquee games. They did a pretty good job of this year. It was probably not quite hearkening back to the ways that teams used to kind of game the RPI when that was in place, but they did a good job of playing better mid-major teams, which at least didn't have them stack tons of games in quad 4 and really impact the overall non-conference strength of schedule and really have it be in the bottom. And so the next thing is you get into some of these marquee games, you just got to win more of them than what IU's been able to do in the last couple of seasons. But philosophically, it seems like he wants to be more aggressive as opposed to less. And so now it's kind of time for the athletic department and the program to try to balance that against, you got to have enough bye games to sell tickets, get people in. I think you're going to see good enthusiasm. So you can't abandon those, but you probably got to find a way to fit in at least one, probably 2 more games against teams from major conferences.
Yeah, I'm excited about the foreign trip. I think that was good when Woodson did it in his first year. It's also good for us that we don't have to wait until November to kind of see some on the court stuff. But each coach handles those trips differently. Some coaches will play everyone to get stuff on tape and not play it like a game. Woodson played it like a regular season game. With playing starters, major starter minutes, so we can just start to see some things, whether we have video of it or not. We get to talk about some basketball in the off season. And then here's my bracket question for you, Andy, and it's getting a lot of play on national podcasts and everything in the middle of the tournament. Has NIL killed the Cinderella? When Arkansas is your Cinderella team in the Sweet 16. There's a lot of questions about is the talent now being consolidated where the money is, and is that taking away the Cinderella, or is this just an outlier of a year where the top teams were really good and were able to advance?
I think both those things can be true to a certain extent. I mean, we'd be foolish to say that NIL is not causing some of the talent to be a little bit more concentrated in some of these leagues. But at the same time, I think this year, and you and I probably look at this through a lot of the same lens, but from a bracketology perspective, like the strength of both the teams at the very top, if you think about really, top couple seed lines, save for St. John's, who knocked me out of Jay's knockout pool. Those top 7 teams were really, really strong throughout. So I think you had a lot of that where your 1 and 2 seeds were really strong. I think even the strength of teams in that really 3 through even 6 or 7 range was really, really, really strong. Now maybe that is the effect of NIL, and I'm arguing against myself and looking at it that way. But I do think more than a lot of years you had more really strong resumes, even in the 4 to 7 seed range, than at least I can remember in recent years. The other thing that I would say is that I think the committee still does a poor job of figuring out how to handle the truly good mid-major teams. The Drakes, the UC San Diegos, the VCU, if you want to consider the A10 a mid-major. I thought when you look at where those teams were seated, I don't think any one of them were seated in a way that none of them would have made the tournament had they not won their conference tournament, which is pretty wild to me in a couple of those cases. I think Drake had 30 wins. VCU, while the A10 is not a top league, I think was fairly dominant within that league, and save for a loss to Seton Hall in the non-conference that nobody thought would be as bad as it ended up looking. UC San Diego, I thought was a really strong team and should have been better than a 12 seed. And even teams like UC Irvine, who didn't get in, won 18 road or neutral games, and really didn't even sniff the field. So I think that is symptomatic of the way the committee handles those teams. I don't know whether that's an inability to try to reconcile things, and a lot of the metrics that are in place now are supposed to help do that. But I think that's a challenge. And so you see those teams as a 12 seed against a set of 5 seeds that's as strong as any we've seen in a while. And the ability for those teams to really go on a run, the deck is stacked against them a little bit. So I think there's a little bit of truth to the NIL thing, but I do think it's somewhat of an anomaly based on this year. I think if you get enough years where this is what it looks like, then yeah, but NIL was pretty big a year ago and you didn't quite see the same thing. So I don't know, a little bit of both for me, I guess. What about you?
And now joining us is Jerod Morris, and we'll get your thoughts, Andy. I know you have to drop off. We thank you for being on here tonight.
I'm curious to get your thoughts before I do on that question. Kind of what your impression of the Cinderella thing is.
I am a lot with you. I think it was top heavy. I think the top 30 teams in the tournament this year were really, really, really good, and that kills a lot of upset chances. So I'm not ready to say that NIL has killed the Cinderella. I do also have a problem with mid-majors not being selected. We were gonna put VCU in if they had lost the tournament. It was obvious that wasn't what the committee wanted. We, meaning Delphi Bracketology. I am a proponent for keeping 2 to 4 spots open for non-Power 4 schools that have good regular seasons but lose in the tournament, and then you select them just like the committee does. And if there ever is expansion, I think part of expansion that I would, not that I have any control over it, but part of the expansion would be a guaranteed set of slots for, I don't want to see, and this isn't in any reference to, Indiana, but Indiana and Ohio State, with their records, expansion's not for them. Expansion is for the Drakes, the VCUs, the UC San Diego's, who had very productive seasons. So I'm not ready to say it. I am concerned that there will be a consolidation of success. If you have money, you get the players. If you don't have money, you don't. Hearing players from good Power 4 or Power 5 schools being offered astronomical amounts of money to go to the very elite blue bloods is shocking to me. And so teams aren't, the mid-majors aren't the ones getting poached now. It's major schools are also getting poached by people who have the most money. Then that becomes like auto racing at some point, where if you had the money, you won the race. If you didn't have the money, you didn't. And I think that potentially really will put a damper on college athletics. And maybe I'm just an old man not liking all this new stuff, but some of the numbers I hear are astronomical for players that are still in the NCAA tournament. And I'll leave it at that because I haven't verified any of the rumors. But what I'm hearing, price tag for people who are still playing, and the schools that have contacted them already, it's just a crazy thing. So it is my fear that NIL will kill the Cinderella and kill college basketball in the end without some sort of structure. The wild, wild west will kill it, but I'm not ready to pull that trigger yet.
Yeah, two quick things to that, and then I do need to go. So, Jerod, nothing personal with you. Although Ryan did drop shortly after I got on. I think I talked too long, and he was like,
"Yeah, what?"
Kind of took the airtime, and he was like, "The hell with this, I'm leaving." But I'm not sure. So, yeah, the two things I'd say with that, Coach, is like I do think that helps consolidate some of the talent, but we have a firsthand view of a program that amassed a lot of talent and wasn't able to win enough games to make the tournament with it. So I don't know that in and of itself leads to that. The people who can do that really well will absolutely flourish in this environment, and maybe IU becomes that
Kansas
team.
State,
but
Kansas State,
so I think there's
Indiana.
examples where you're doing that it's there, and I 100% agree with you on if there is expansion, it needs to skew toward how do you get more of these teams in, because really, and ironically enough, given where the new coach is from, West Virginia is the only team to me that had any legitimate gripe about being left out. And I texted that with you guys on the day of the selection show, thinking that there's no way that West Virginia would be out, and basically said, any of these teams that get left out have absolutely nothing that they can complain about. It was very clear what they did or didn't do. And I wasn't going to complain about any of it. West Virginia to me was the one that really, was unfortunate the way that was handled, and the injury thing. And that's a whole nother probably bracketology related conversation we could have at another time. But I think, this year again, at least showed, you had a heck of a time trying to fill more spots with power conference teams that had really flawed resumes, as opposed to some of these others who just didn't get a chance. But anyway, Absolutely. All right, well, I got to run.
Andy, always good talking to you.
I didn't want you to be on your own though, Coach, with
I appreciate it.
While Ryan had to leave. So anyway,
glad we could pass like ships in the night, Andy.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure, Jerod.
Yes.
So
nice to see you, bud.
So Jerod, interesting. We've been through the gamut today: offense, defense, practice. Eddie has had some nice video clips, which really added to the show. But I'm just interested, and I'm sure our viewers are interested in, where are you at right now, 1 week into Coach Darian DeVries' tenure as Indiana's basketball coach? What are you feeling? What do you want to see? Just let it go.
All right. Are you ready for my Coach DeVries hot take here?
Let's go.
By the way, Coach Corso, thank you for hosting tonight while the rest of us,
you're welcome.
this used to be a proper show, a well-oiled and reliable machine. It's taken us, when was Coach DeVries hired? He was hired last week. It's taken us this long to get another show together. And then Ryan has computer problems. I'm getting Teddy to bed. Andy can't be here. So, hey, but you know what? We're here and we're doing a show and it's fun. And we've got the dawning of a new era of Indiana basketball. I mean, I guess the way that I look at it is like this. I would love to come on here with like this super hot, scorching take and, you know, provide all the reasons why this is for sure going to work. But, you know, having lived through the end of the Tom Crean era that started out so promising and failed, heck, even going back to the Kelvin Sampson era, which started out promising and flopped, and then Archie Miller, which kind of felt like it never even really got going, and then Coach Woodson with all the ups and downs. You know, I just think as Indiana fans and even as college basketball fans generally, we've learned how little we actually know about, you know, what's going to make these hires work. And, you know, there were reasons why people doubted the Woodson hire, and there were reasons why people doubted the Archie Miller hire and all that stuff. But, you know, I think the way that I look at it is I think there are a lot of reasons to be optimistic about Coach DeVries. Like even just trying to take a step back, you know, remove the emotion from it and just try and look at it, you know, from an analytical perspective, from a basketball perspective. Like it really seems like this guy can coach. And I don't think you're always going to see that just from raw 1-loss records or from, you know, tournament trips, because obviously, you know, he hasn't won a whole lot of tournament games. But when you look at the context of how bad of a program Drake was and how much better they were with him, and then what West Virginia did in 1 year, you know, after how bad they were the previous year, and what the previous fan base has kind of said about him and the esteem that they held him in. I mean, some of the comments from the West Virginia fans are just effusive in their praise of how good of a coach he is. And so you look at all that, you look at some of the stylistic things, you listen to some of the things that he has said, which frankly, I mean, it's like just some of the stuff that we've wanted to hear for so long. And so it's real easy to like start adding all that stuff up and really start to get excited. And I think for anybody who's feeling that way, like go run with it. There's no downside. I don't think. I'm not one of those that says it's the hope that kills you. I think the hope, the excitement, and the enthusiasm, if you're feeling it and it's genuine, go for it. And I am starting to feel a little bit of that. But it's balanced with the reality that the Indiana job is different than the Drake job. It's different than the West Virginia job. And we just don't know. You know, we don't know if this is going to be the right fit. We don't know how this is all going to work. And frankly, you know, the Big Ten Conference, I think, got a lot tougher this year. I mean, Ben McCollum taking over for what it kind of felt like it had become a bit of a stale Iowa program, even though, you know, Fran, for all the jokes that we make about him, is a solid coach. You know, Minnesota never really got it going with Ben Johnson. Nico Medved's a really good coach. We know the other good coaches that are here. So, I mean, Darian DeVries could be a really good coach, and you could still be the 9th, 10th, 11th best coach in the Big Ten. So I say all that to say, I don't know. But there's a whole lot of things that I'm reading and hearing and seeing that I'm genuinely excited about. And, you know, whereas I really felt for the first time in a long time as an Indiana basketball fan this season, especially at the early part of the season, just more emotionally detached from what was going on than I've ever really felt, you know, I'll be back ready to go at the beginning of next season. I'm fascinated to see what this looks like on the court. I'm fascinated to see what kind of roster he builds. And I'm just, you know, fascinated to support him, do everything we can, you know, to help make it work. And hopefully it does. But, you know, so it's one of those things, like if you want to get totally excited, I wouldn't try and talk you out of it. And if you wanted to be a little bit skeptical, I really wouldn't try and talk anybody out of that either, because I think there's reasons to feel both things. And so I just kind of feel like I'm in the middle, but probably shaded a little bit more towards optimism. And here's the reason why, to kind of sum it up, is, you know, as we kind of look at, and you and Andy, I think we're just talking about this, like this new era of college basketball with NIL and the importance of resources and transient rosters and just all this stuff. I think Indiana is well positioned to build talented rosters in the new era of college basketball, because I think in a lot of ways we did it this season. And so, you know, it's going to be harder and harder to build continuity and do some of these other things. I think you're really going to be an advantage if you just have a guy who can coach ball and bring teams together, turn things around quickly, you know, match, you know, adapt to what your players for that season can do well. And I think DeVries has shown that. And so that to me is the most important reason to be optimistic, because this is different. You know, you're not building, over 3 or 4 years. I mean, that Purdue is, they're certainly trying. We'll see if they can keep doing that. And to their credit, they've been very successful so far. But even they may start to struggle to do that because the sums of money are just going to become so vast. So that to me is the reason why I'm the most excited, because it seems like this guy can really coach. It seems like he understands modern basketball. And I think just the resources of Indiana will give him a baseline of pretty good talent. And he seems like a guy who can put it together. But, we won't know until it happens. I mean, we were all pretty optimistic about Archie. And then at halftime of that Indiana State game, it's like, okay, what is going on here? And then, obviously everything else happened, but I don't think we need to compare them anymore. But I do think there are legit reasons to be optimistic.
You get cautious. When I was really optimistic about Archie and hung on to Archie longer than most people did, and then that turned out to be an incorrect position. And again, you're entitled to be optimistic or hesitant no matter what. That's part of being a fan. And then I was a little skeptical of Woodson. I mentioned this earlier on the show. And so you just want one to work out, right? You just want someone to work out and win basketball games and win consistently. And then I spent some time looking at the top 20 teams in KenPom, and you take away the old veterans who've been doing it for 20 or 30 years, and you look at where the guys came from, and almost every guy had this kind of track that worked out. We're just snake bitten because we tried that with Archie and it didn't work out. But you just look at guys and where they were. They started at small schools. They won at small schools. Then they jumped to a bigger school, and then maybe they jumped to a third school. But they've won at every position. You go through the Sweet 16 in the same way. And other than your Patinos and your Izzos who have been around forever, which you're not going to hire someone like that into a program. It just has to happen. You see a bunch of guys who have spent 5 or 6 years. Mark Pope has a team in the Sweet 16 in his first year at Kentucky, was at BYU and then was at Utah Valley for years. Pat Kelsey was at small schools for 14, 15 years and really had a turnaround at Louisville. And while I'm not trying to say that's going to mean Indiana's going to be in the tournament or win 25 games or whatever else, but good coaches come from the same track as what Coach DeVries. And I know a lot of people, the word I heard was underwhelming. From a couple guys that I coached with or played with in high school. And then all of a sudden they started watching film and they started listening to him. And all of a sudden it changed. And they're like, okay, I like this guy. He can coach. He can do some things. And I think he's what Indiana needed. He didn't need we didn't need Signetti in basketball. We needed someone to be Indiana basketball, come in, have a plan of playing basketball and coaching basketball and getting the roster and trying to do it. The plan is exactly what Indiana needs, and that's why I'm excited. The execution, we don't know until year 1, year 2, year 3. It could be a great plan, and it could fall flat, and we're doing this again in 3 or 4 years. So I cannot guarantee it. I'm not promoting that and going to say it's an automatic top of the Big Ten, Final Four type hire. It's a guy with the plan who can coach ball. And I think that's what Indiana needed at this point of where Indiana has been in the last, we had a guy who really knew ball, and he just kind of lost it with recruiting and behind the scenes and Tom Crean with some behind the court. But his basketball acumen was fantastic. I'll still argue that to this day. But he just ran afoul in some other areas, and then the other two guys lost it in different ways. We need a guy to be successful, and we weren't getting a lot of our wish list, Jerod. A lot of people wanted the bigger names or pull the guy from Arizona or pull the guy, and we just don't know if they were available or they were just using us to get a contract renewal or whatever. We don't know how serious that was. So you had to go to that next level. And I really think we got one of the best of the next level. Did you want a Brownell, a Collins, a Cronin? If you go down that next one to the lower levels, DeVries, McCollum's only coached for 1 year. Like everyone, he might be the better, but I'm excited because it's a guy that I can relate to. Like what he's talking about in these clips and these interviews and these podcasts, like I can understand from a basketball standpoint. I've spent 4 years not understanding what's going on, and again, not to go backwards, but it's a breath of fresh air for this old coach to have a guy who's talking basketball again. I hope he can execute the plan and be successful.
Yeah, you said something interesting there. We didn't need a Signetti. On the one hand, I would disagree slightly, just in that, Indiana Signetti was the perfect guy at the right time for Indiana football, and so we need that, right? We need the right guy at the right time.
Not the rah Google
basketball.
me,
right? But that's what I'm saying.
Type of guy. That's
what
what
I'm
I was
saying.
referring
Signetti,
to.
yes, and that's what I want to say is, Signetti came in and realized Indiana football. It had built up a little bit of a brand under Tom Allen with the LEO and all that stuff, but that had faded. And there was no excitement. There's nothing there. He realized he had to be that and bring the excitement and, kind of manufacture it a little bit because it's IU football. And he did it, and the results backed it up. I mean, it was just absolutely perfect. DeVries doesn't need to be that, and one thing I'm starting to hear, as, seen his press conference and we've seen a couple of interviews is, this guy may not have the most effervescent personality, and which to me, I think, okay, maybe not. And that immediately now people start to draw a comparison in their mind to Archie Miller, right? Well, Archie didn't have a great personality and he didn't really connect, but I still think it's different. What it comes down to is you got to win and play good basketball. Archie's issues were there was no real personality. There was no attempt to connect. You're kind of playing this style that now seems like, really started to seem like it was getting outdated as soon as he got here. And so there's just all these things stacked on top of each other. DeVries doesn't need to be up there doing rah-rah stuff because it's Indiana basketball. If there are results,
right,
we'll all take care of that. We'll get rah-rah. We'll help do all of that. You go coach ball, explain it in a way, the thing, I will say this, one thing that I don't think national people really get, or at least they don't voice about Indiana fans. And I saw Eamon Brennan, write this in one of his latest columns about the DeVries hire. And it was so refreshing to see. And I don't remember the exact wording, but to paraphrase, it was something like Indiana fans want to know that their coach is at the forefront of basketball, really knows what he's talking about, is the kind of coach that other coaches look at. And that is so spot on. We don't want to feel like we're behind the times because so many of us grew up in an Indiana basketball that was, the standard, right? And that's not just with results and all this other stuff. It's just with how you're playing. And so I think when you provide a style like that, that's going to provide some built-in patience. There's always going to be the idiot fringe that, you lose one game and they're all going to go crazy. But I'm talking about the core of the fan base, the ones that really struggled to get on board with Mike Woodson, honestly. And it had nothing else to do with anything but I just don't really believe in the way that we're playing. And we're going to win some games and sometimes it's going to look okay, but this isn't a sustainable way to play. And so I think and again, we haven't seen one game yet, so we don't know for sure, but if Indiana plays the way that DeVries teams have played in the past and the way that he talks about, I think you're going to start to get that. And I think Indiana football needed an individual to have a personality. I think Indiana basketball needs the team to have a personality that the fans resonate with. And from everything we've heard, from everything that's been said, from what you hear from, again, fans of his teams prior, DeVries builds that. And so I think if he does that, the rest of the stuff doesn't matter, because we know what you said, right? It's like you're a coach, you have friends who are coaches. They don't really know what to think about this guy, but they hear him talk and they connect with him. Right. And so when he's talking to other high school coaches and when he's connecting with some of the people that really matter, they don't care if he can engage an audience at a press conference or, deliver you 45 minutes of compelling audio content on a podcast. They want to talk ball and they want to know that he can coach ball. So, and again, I think there are some early indications that he is like that. So, that to me is why there's kind of this foundation of, okay, we're all so weathered. We're going to have this skepticism until we see it because it's just been so long. But that's where I start to get intrigued, and you start to hear some of that stuff. Oh, what about the personality? It's like, I don't think that matters as much if the other stuff is there, but the other stuff has to be there. Obviously. I mean, you got to win, you got to have results, all that stuff. It actually has to materialize on the court. But there's reason to think that it will. And that's good. Of course, the saying, right? Be careful what you wish for, and yes, I think there was a list of guys we all wanted, that we would have liked, and if Indiana could have gotten, Tommy Lloyd or Grant McCasland, like what did I have them higher on my list than DeVries? I did, just because they're a little bit more proven. They seem like a little bit more of a sure thing, but there's no guarantee that DeVries can't, after 2 or 3 years at Indiana, isn't right on that level, right? And now he's got his chance. So it's a little bit more of a risk, but this guy doesn't have a defined ceiling. And Patrick in the Discord actually did a nice bit of research where he went and he did a sentiment analysis of when Todd Golden was hired, when Pat Kelsey was hired, some of these other coaches, the kind of analysis that just makes Mike Weemuth, just very excited. And the sentiment analysis was basically, like Todd Golden, especially his first season wasn't very good. And it's like, oh, we hired this young guy, doesn't know what he's doing. He can't coach at this level. And same thing with Pat Kelsey. But then as the results start to come in and you see, it's like, oh, okay, these guys can actually do it. And, you see what they're doing now. So you've always got to be careful. The initial sentiment is just based, positive or negative, is based on so much speculation, so much projection, all that stuff. And I hope as we continue to go through this process, and hopefully we don't have to go through it again, but we've gone through so many of these hires. I think Indiana fans are we're getting better at figuring out signal from noise at the hire standpoint. And I think as you dig into DeVries, you're realizing there's a little bit more positive signal here that you can actually buy into. Going to have to see it. And that can help counter some of the negative sentiment where it's like, but we haven't seen him do it, blah, 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 all this other stuff. There's at least some stuff to grasp onto that counters that.
So you mentioned 3 names. I've done some back research too. Tommy Lloyd had 0 coaching experience other than being an assistant at Gonzaga. What would we feel if we hired a Division I assistant in and had that? McCasland was at North Texas before he got the Texas Tech job and was very successful. Didn't even have a year at a Power 5 school like DeVries had. Golden had one good year at San Francisco. He's 17 to 21 wins. Yeah. I mean, he got that program back, but I think he made the NCAA tournament once in the West Coast Conference, and he had a bad year the first year at Florida, and now look what he's doing. So that was when I said there's been a lot of coaches that have been on this track that have worked out. There's been a lot of coaches that have been on this track that haven't worked out as well. And the whole, for me, I have dismissed the experience, the winning in the tournament, those criteria that some people will value. I get that. I've dismissed that as a negative piece because I've seen too many coaches who didn't have that, who really knew how to coach, go on to win successfully. And you mentioned 3 of them that I think are highly successful that didn't display any of that experience and have gone on to lead top-notch programs. We won't know. There is no guarantee, but that kind of alleviated some of my pause or whatever concerns I might have had when I went looking. There's a lot of people that had the same track that have been consistent. Now it's just up to coach to get it done and put a winner out there.
One other thing that I will say is, I think there is, when you listen to, to DeVries talk, and again, he doesn't come with all this tournament success. Like, to a certain extent, he's not a proven commodity yet. Like, he's a proven commodity. Like, this is a really good mid-major coach. We know that. And he did good in one season at West Virginia, but he's not yet a proven commodity at this level. And that's one thing that I did get from his press conference is, and when you read about him, there's a hunger there. You hear words like grinder and all this stuff. Like, there is a humility, there is a hunger, there is a, nothing is owed to me. I need to go get it. And this is where, when you talk about the right coach at the right time, I think Indiana basketball needs that. Because I think Indiana basketball has been, a lot of hype and very little substance, a lot of accolades, a lot of all the trappings of a successful program without actually being a successful program.
Yeah.
And I don't get the sense that DeVries thinks that just because he got hired at Indiana, that now suddenly he's arrived and everything is, fine and hunky-dory. You reflect back on Mike Woodson's early time at Indiana. And there were some things that we all got really excited about, as Mike Woodson's kind of talking about Indiana basketball like it was the Indiana basketball of the late 70s and 80s when he played. And it was really fun and comforting to hear for a lot of us who have been fans for a long time and yearn, even though I wasn't alive or a fan then, but I remember what the late 80s and early 90s were like. And it was great to like have someone speaking about that. But the truth is that era is way in the rearview mirror. And this Indiana basketball isn't anything like that. But I do think Indiana basketball, has operated like it is the Indiana basketball of old, but without some of the hunger and the humility and all those things that it took to get there. And I think that's what Indiana needs to rebuild. Like, it doesn't mean that the tradition doesn't matter. And it doesn't mean that you can't still play that card when it's right, because that's a big part of the reason why we're all here. But I think we need a fresh start in terms of those are other people's accomplishments. Now it's time for us to do our accomplishments. And DeVries strikes me as a guy who's going to approach the job that way. And I think that's a really important mindset, not just for the program to internalize, but for fans to internalize too. Look, we can still talk our trash. We can still, point out the 5 banners to Purdue's none until the cows come home, because that's part of what being a fan is all about. But there also needs to be some recognition of, hey, our peers in the Big Ten for the last 10, 15 years are not Michigan State, and they're not Purdue, and it's not Illinois, it's Penn State and Nebraska and those other teams. And we got some work to do, to keep moving up. That's just reality. It's not where anybody wants to be. And I don't think it's being negative or pessimistic. It is sober. Just look at the records, And so I think a coach who comes in hungry like that, I think that's going to be a good fit. It's all a hypothesis right now, but that's the other reason that I feel some optimism is I think we're going to get the hunger back to prove ourselves. Like, we have something to prove. We stand on the shoulders of giants, the guys that were here before, and we have those banners, but we've got to go do it again, build something new, because it's been so long.
Yeah, and for those of us who are optimistic, it's because the blueprint is there, and we think in order to achieve where you want us to be and where we all want us to be, you have to have someone like this. Whether this is the guy or the next one or the next one, whatever, but this plan gives us a chance. That's where maybe it's too much hope or whatever. But I think the last 8 years have been such a struggle from the leadership aspect, and good people with good intentions, but it failed. And there's no other way to say it, that we now have a restart, which is refreshing, and it is the type of guy, at least from a coaching standpoint, where that blueprint will work. But there's a lot of ifs out there, as we all need to be careful of. There's the right roster, all of that has to come together, and then you got to not have injuries, and there's just so many components that can wreck a good blueprint for anything. But I'm excited because I think this gives us a chance to reclaim the top levels of the Big Ten again in a year or two. I feel that way. Maybe I've got my rose-colored glasses on, but I've misplaced them for about 4 or 5 years. I haven't had them on, and I don't feel complete without totally being bought in. And Coach DeVries' hire has me, again, totally back with Indiana basketball, where I have been most of my life. I went this way through with Indiana football, and Cignetti reignited it, right? It's a power of a leader. And not all leaders will get to the college football playoff or to the Sweet 16, and they can still be somewhat successful. But I am on the overly excited stage. I know both my sons are, and a lot of the coaching buddies.
Brent's pumped.
Come around to it.
Brent is pumped.
Brent's a little out of control, but
yeah, you need to rein him in on Twitter.
love him whatsoever.
He's great, man. I will say this.
I had to stop him the other day. He was going after someone who was criticizing our bracketology thing. And I'm like, dude, I blocked the guy. He's got 31 followers. Quit. I know I'm your dad, but stop. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, this is kind of a half-baked thought, so let me see if I can get this out. And I think there are probably going to be some people who disagree with that, and that's okay. I think, going along with how I think this is kind of a good opportunity for a program reset and for the program to adopt a bit more humility and like, let's go earn this stuff, right? Like I think part of the criticism of the Woodson era and even going back prior to that is a lot of arrogance without achievement. It kind of felt like Indiana basketball carried itself like, oh, we've done all this stuff and our stuff doesn't stink. But, then you look at the actual results and it's like, okay, and, so I think getting back to that point for the program is important. I think it's also important for fans to kind of meet the program where it's at and adopt a similar mindset. And that doesn't mean that long-term standards and expectations change. But, what I've seen and been guilty of in the time since we've started the show is, for me as a fan, right? Like I was, my formative years were 92 and 93. And I kind of always, feel like I'm, and obviously in 94, we still made the Sweet 16 and there were still like a couple good seasons after that, but when the first 2 years we did the show, the 2012, obviously the Watt Shot season, and the 2013 year when we're the number 1 seed and win the Big Ten title, I think everybody had this feeling like we are back. We went through this wilderness. We went through those 3 years with Tom Crean, but we are back. We're going to be able to sustain this now. Like, let's go. Indiana basketball is back and we can go back to feeling about IU basketball like we used to. We're, moving back into the centerpiece of college basketball, like all this stuff. And then 2014 flopped and 2015 wasn't that good. And we kind of bounced back up in 2016, but then it all fell off and we changed coaches. And then we've got Archie and then we've got Woodson. And now it's been like 9 years. And it has kind of felt like from 2014 all the way through last year, as fans, our mindset is a bit stuck like we're in 2013. And we're just expecting like, hey, we're back and we won the Big Ten and we won the Sweet 16. And that is now the standard here moving forward. And if it's anything less than that, we're going to be disappointed. And we're not going to celebrate the small, not everybody, but a lot of people. And we're not going to celebrate the small wins along the way. And I think that's part of what has led to this disconnect where it's like, players, I think even and some of the coaches have felt like, it's like, what can we do to please these people? Our answer, of course, would be, well, more than you did. But also, it kind of felt like there was just no joy along the journey at all. And even, Mike Woodson's second season, and we've debated it on this show. Was that a good season? Was it a bad season? It wasn't up to what the potential could have been. But look at the last 10 years of Indiana basketball. Finishing second in the Big Ten, getting a top 4 seed, and, making it to the round of 32, that's actually a pretty good season for what Indiana basketball has been. And I think if, it's not what we want the final destination to be, but I think as fans, we need to do, or we can do a little bit of a better job meeting the program where it's at and starting to help take the small stepping stones with them. And not, when something good happens, even if it's not quite as good as we want, not constantly be thinking about what we don't have, but this is new. The players who were going to come in, they weren't here. They didn't lose to Syracuse. They didn't lose to Miami. They didn't lose to Kansas in the Elite Eight in 1993, which sometimes some of us still stay up at night thinking about, right? Like that's not their burden. Their burden is to build the new Indiana basketball. And I think it doesn't mean that the standards and expectations aren't right, but I think we can be more helpful as fans if we are more willing to celebrate the small wins along the way and kind of grow back again into a dominant, arrogant fan base as the team does it. Because just like the program has acted a little arrogant without achievement, we have as well sometimes. And so I think this is a great opportunity for all of us to kind of reassess how we're doing things and be a little bit better. And I just, and I've gotten frustrated about that because I think sometimes like, hey, that's, we want a good regular season game. The rest of the season may not be going on, but for a couple of days, we can at least be happy about that. And then let's go to the next one. Let's live in the moment a little bit more instead of constantly wishing and wondering, why can't things be like they used to be? Well, we're back on the journey, man. Let's go on the journey with the program. We got a fresh start. I think so many things about the Woodson era were just disconnected. And look, the program has faults for that. Woodson has faults for that. I think everybody involved in Indiana basketball has faults for that. This is an opportunity for a fresh start. And I think humility is a great mindset for us all to have on the path to greatness again. We may not be there. Like This season, we may just be okay. And then maybe the next season we're good. And then maybe the next season we're very good. And then maybe the next season we're great. But if we're just okay next season, let's not, ruin the experience because we just can't stand that we're not great yet. It's a bit of a journey to get there. And there may actually be more ups and downs now because of NIL and how transient rosters are. You may be up one year and down the next, and up one year and down the next. I think we've got to steel ourselves for that roller coaster and handle it a little bit better. Indiana basketball was special. And there are a few off-court elements that still make Indiana basketball special. But until Indiana basketball is special consistently on the court, we can't constantly, belittle every actual achievement because it's not all the way back up here yet. Let's go on the journey with the program as we take the stair steps up there. I just think it'll be a healthier experience for everybody if we look at it that way.
I agree 100% on we live in a what have you done for me lately? You win 3 games and you lose 1. But where I might disagree a little bit with is I don't think in the last 8 years we've had a program that played the way that Indiana fans want them to play, and that's not an offensive style or a defensive style. It's just, Archie had this problem too. It just didn't seem like it was Indiana basketball. Togetherness, hustle, whatever else, you win a game, then you get beat by 30. You win a game, like that had never happened in Indiana. I think it took us all by surprise that the up and down that you talk about was really up and down, and that there were issues, things that went on. I know that for me personally, it just took me like the last year and a half. I did the show. You try to stay positive, but I wasn't enthused about Indiana basketball, and it really wasn't about wins or losses. It was just about I didn't think the program was doing things the right way, and I think we have great fans. I get sick and tired of this fishbowl and can you handle this? And Indiana's got – you know what? If all you do is look at Indiana fans on social media, every fan base on social media is a fishbowl.
Terrible.
Right?
Well, they're all terrible.
But don't tell me that little kid in candy stripes who's there with his grandpa watching Indiana basketball, win or lose, they go home and they get a pizza or they do whatever. Like, that's the time of their life. Like, we have a lot of traditions. This is where you're right. And we need to be – you need to display an appropriate or right amount of patience, but we still have those standards and we have the right to do things. A coach who comes in here – and really plays tough-nosed defense and loses 2 games at the buzzer is going to be looked at a lot better than a guy who wins 1 by 20 and then gets blown out by 30, right?
Yes.
Because when you really believe and then you feel bad for the guys. Like, oh, man, they really laid it on the line. That official took it away from us. They didn't call that travel on Derek Queen. That kind of thing. That's what Indiana basketball was to me. Like, you expected to win every game. When you didn't, you weren't mad at the team. You're just like, okay, we'll get the next one. That's what I long for again. I don't know if this time of where society is with everything has to be more negative and the social media leading to negative comments. I always yelled, even in the night area at the TV, but no one heard me. Now I pick up my phone and yell at the team through social media, and then you retweet it to all the 20,000 people, and then everyone sees it, right? So it's a new era, but I'm with you. I that's what I want to get back to is where win or lose, we just love the team, because of the way that they play, the way that they're coached, the way that they communicate, the way that they interact, the way that they explain everything. That's been missing under the last 2 head coaches. That's the disconnect. We have some responsibility with it, but I also think the leadership didn't really understand that. And that's going to be big for Coach DeVries to try to understand that in good times and bad times to keep doing what he's doing right now is talking ball, right? We are a great fan base, and we can help this program get to great heights with the right type. And that's where his words have meant a lot to me. We want the right type of guys. We're not going to cut corners, get a more talented guy if they're not the right fit. Well, my goodness, if it works, it could be good.
So as I said, my thought was a half-baked thought, and I'm glad I put it out there because you completed it. What you just said was the part that was missing, because you can't you can't fake it. I think Indiana fans understand what good basketball is, and you can't make Indiana fans feel any level of excitement for just bad basketball. But what you said there, right? And I think we've said this before, like, give us a program that we can lose with, right? And what I mean by that is, look, you're going to play a lot of games. Some teams are more talented. Some nights other teams shoot better. The ball doesn't bounce your way. But can you walk away saying, hey, you know what? We put a good foot forward tonight. We didn't win. Let's go on to the next one. Because too often, what I was trying to describe was more, it kind of felt like, hey, we'd win a game, but a lot of us didn't really believe in the way that we were playing. So it's like, okay, let's exhale for 2 seconds because we won a game, but there's still all this angst about what's coming next. And then as soon as we lose, everybody's flying off the handle. And the program does have a responsibility for that. And I guess that's what I'm saying is, if all these things that we think about Coach DeVries prove true, that we play a style more people believe in, they play hard more often than not, and even when they lose, you think, hey, you know what? Their coach was just a little bit better. Their players were just a little bit better tonight, but I feel confident. I'm ready for the next game. I'm excited to watch the next game, right? When those things are there, now let's try not to just exhale when we win, but let's be excited. Let's celebrate when we win, and kind of minimize the losses, where I think that's been flipped for about 9 years now, where we react really heavily to the losses and the wins are just like, okay, well, that's what we're supposed to do next, and that's just, I don't think that's healthy for anybody.
Indiana has a lot of those coaches that Brent and I call it trust. We went down to the baseball game. Indiana baseball has gotten off to a little bit of a tough start. We trust Coach Mercer. We sit as close to the dugout as we possibly can because we want to absorb everything that he says, because he works hard at it, and sometimes you just lose games, right? And it doesn't go the way you want, but we trust him. You trust Coach Morin, right? You Signetti, you coach Coach Yeagley on the soccer. Whether they go to the Final Four there or not, you know that he's going to put out a product that is representative of our university, right? That's what we've missed at the back end of Crean, and then with Archie, and then with Coach Woodson. It just never worked to where you could get to that level of trust that the product is going to be somewhat okay, no matter what the result is, right? I love watching baseball, and they're 14-11 right now. They're going to have a struggle to make the postseason, but I believe they're in good hands. Do I think there needs to be adjustments? Yes, they need some better pitching and this and that, but it's not a give up on the program type stuff. That's where we need to get back to, right? That team we need to lose, that coach and that player that we're okay losing with, we're not happy with it, we don't accept it, but you know what? Get them next time, guys. We're going to go. If that's possible in today's society, I hope it is. I've kind of taken a social media sabbatical, and I've felt really good the last 7-8 days, because I just think that the negativity on there is what we get labeled as IU fans. And I'm sure there's some emails to coaches, and there's some other things that go on besides social media that we don't even know about, that is gross and incompetent of people to do. But every time I see families and kids and people dressed up at those games, don't tell me we don't have – that our fans cause problems for the basketball. You win. Look at football. We had 54,000 people waving flags, and everyone said, well, it's the fans' fault that who would want to coach here? Who would want to win here? Because the fans weren't here at the games. Well, you know what? We're selling out, and my season tickets got moved because we need more student section. Yeah. It's on the program to do the right things, but we need to react better as well. I do agree with that.
I'll tell you the other thing. The other missing piece here in what I'm trying to explain is, what was the justification that you would often hear or see from people, whether it was in our live chats after games, on Twitter, when people were especially nasty about the program, or really mad after losses, right? You would often hear, well, the fans have to hold the program accountable. And that is true at a certain point, but it's when a program and a fan base have reached a really unhealthy relationship. because I don't really think it's the job of fans to hold the program accountable. I think it's the job of fans to support and uplift the program for the most part, until fans start to viscerally feel like no one else is holding the program accountable. And then they feel like, well, someone's got to do it. And this is where I do empathize some with IU fans over the last 8 years. And that, look, we're not in practices. We don't really know everything that happened. We don't know what Archie did. We don't know what Coach Woodson did. But fans got the sense watching basketball for a couple hours a few times a week, because of the inconsistency of the effort, the inconsistency of the focus, all those things, that there was a lack of accountability in the program. And then fans start to think, well, dang it, I have to do that. No fans were worrying about that when Bob Knight was the coach, because you knew the coach was holding the program accountable, right? And I think that's what Indiana fans yearn for, is getting back to that trust, not just trust in scheme, not just trust in recruiting, not just trust in substitution patterns, but trust in, hey, you know what? I can be like the good job, good effort kid. When we lose, I can cheer these guys and try and uplift them, because I know when they get to practice, they're probably going to catch hell, because, this coach is holding them accountable, and that's not my role as a fan. And I think when fans feel that way, that's when things are operating the right way. And when that gets inverted, that's when now you get a lot of this, people criticize it as acting entitled and toxic and all this stuff. And I think there's some truth to that. But I think it comes from a place of, hey, this thing's important to me. And it just is, languishing far below what I feel is reasonable. How do I make my voice heard? What do I do? And that comes out in unhealthy ways. It doesn't justify everything that comes from that. But, the only way that you can, you got to try and empathize and understand even things that you disagree with, if you're going to try and find a solution to it. And so, the problems with fans don't just come from, well, I'm just going to wake up and be hateful today. It comes from, this is something that's important to me, and it's really struggling, and I feel powerless, and I don't know what to do. And I'm a human, and sometimes that emotion comes out in a really unhealthy way, but what's the actual reason why that's happening? And I think that's the other thing that will really help, is if there is that trust in, hey, Coach DeVries has this, okay? He's got that stuff. What's our job? Let's go handle right? Do your job. And it just kind of feels like everybody's sense of what their job was got all, messed up and out of whack.
But you'll always have a certain percentage of fans that won't like, if we would have brought Rick Pitino in there, it's going to be the people who just thrive on being negative, though, right?
Well, sure.
That's not the group. That's not the group you're talking about.
That's a society problem.
When you lose that middle group, you lose a middle group and that apathy starts, I chose to be apathetic, right? I still did the post-game show, but I wasn't reading every article and everything. I would spend hours, normal years, of reading everything and doing all that. I'm back to that now, but I got apathetic about the program. That was my reaction, right? I'm just not going to care as much because it's just not what I thought it was going to be. I chose that path. I can understand other people lashing out on social media or writing emails or doing whatever. There's different ways of voicing your displeasure. I chose to be quiet and just do what I had to do. But when you lose people, not that I'm a great fan or a donor, but when you lose people who were there in 87 and in the fountain and wear candy stripes at home on the couch, when you lose them, there's a problem. And we as coaches talk about that too. When your parents of your best player have a problem with you, you better sit them down and listen to you. With your 12th man and your parents are complaining that they don't get playing time, maybe you don't pay as much attention to them, right? If you're in business, you're going to have a couple employees that are always going to be negative, and if you cower to them and do procedures for them only, you're not going to be productive. You want to lift those people up, and the one way you do it is by having good leadership, and hopefully Coach DeVries will provide that on the court, off the court, and provide some stability in that middle group that we can get back to being 100% and then drown out those that are just negative because that's what they want to be no matter what. But I think Indiana basketball in the last few years lost that middle, and that's what eventually spoke out to what you said, regardless of how they spoke out. We'd like to get that back. I think that's what every fan base – I think that's what, our rival has right now.
Yeah.
And
just to be clear –
well said.
And that doesn't mean that we're not going to come on here on post-game shows and break down basketball and criticize decisions we don't like, and that I'll go on a fight, if DeVries, sits as point guard because he got 2 fouls 10 minutes into the first half, and I'm not going to come on here and be frustrated about it. Like those little things, those are little basketball things though. It's what you said there about like kind of viscerally feeling apathy or not caring or, all of those things that we just talked about. Like when that gets mixed into the stew, it gets bad. And that's what's happened. And it's built on itself. And, to a certain extent, Mike Woodson had to also deal with people's frustration from what came before him. And that got piled on to the frustration that they had with him. Is that really fair? I mean, that's the job, but it doesn't mean that we couldn't have all handled it a little bit better. And I guess that's my only message. We've got a chance now for a fresh start. We don't have, like, just because we have in the past, it feels like the frustration keeps building. We can make this a breaking point, and we can say, man, the last 8 years sucked. It really hasn't been good. And overall, the last 25 years are not what we want for Indiana basketball. But we are not going to put the weight of that on Darian DeVries' shoulders. Let's give him a fresh start.
Yep.
Let's come at this with a fresh mindset. And if he, everybody needs to think about their own kind of personal checklist of what kind of basketball you want to see. And if you're starting to see it, but the results aren't quite there yet, maybe try to actively suppress some of those negative thoughts from bubbling up into communication and say, you know what, let me be patient a little bit. Let me wait and see. Honestly, I felt like we did that with Archie Miller when it was like, hey, we're playing better defense. We're seeing a few things that we like. But then by the end of year 2 and into year 3, it was like, okay, but this isn't really adding up to anything more. And I'm losing belief in this, and that's what I hope that we can do with Coach DeVries as much as possible. Give him a fresh start, understand what you're looking for. And if you're starting to see some of those things, even if it's taking a little bit longer for the results to come, we're not Kansas right now. We're not Duke right now. We don't have the expectation of being in the top 10. We're not Houston right now. We're not Purdue right now. We don't have that. The thing isn't built to that level. And so it may take some time to get there, and let's give it the opportunity to do that.
What?
God, this is going to be like a 6-hour show. People are just going to keep popping on as others drop off.
I was shocked you guys were still here, so I just decided to chime in. Apologize for jumping off earlier, guys. Pretty much the worst thing that can happen at work happened to me. Well, where you still have the job. I got locked out of my work computer because I did a software update, and all of a sudden the password doesn't work. So waiting on IT to get back to me, and had to open up a computer that I hadn't turned on in probably 9 months, and kept dropping me off the stream and needing to update and all those things. So hi, I'm back.
Welcome back to the show.
Jerod, you're on the show.
I'm here, man. I'm here. Good to be here. I thought we were all 4 going to be here at once tonight, but it didn't. You hopped on and Andy came on, and then
I know, and I didn't even talk to Andy.
Andy had to leave. I know.
It's so crazy.
Anyway,
so what are you guys talking about?
Coach DeVries.
I heard
some. Yeah. I think just the opportunity for a fresh start. Which
I think the thing that excites me the most is changes, and it's just a chance to do things differently. And I don't mean like that to cast aspersions on the past group, but I think everybody was done with the past group. And there were a lot of people in that group who worked exceptionally hard. I think the assistant coaches did. There we go, Debbie. I appreciate that. The assistant coaches did incredible work, especially on the recruiting trail, to get Indiana into some of those recruitments that they probably didn't deserve to be in, given the overall situation of the program and the head coach's attitude towards recruiting and all of those things. So I feel bad for them. I think a lot of them worked really hard, and I respect a lot of them. I respect some guys who aren't there anymore. But I just think it's the idea of something new is always, when you get a new car, you're really excited about it. When there's any kind of new thing that you think is going to be better than the other thing, there's excitement. And I felt that. I think we've all talked about it in group chats. We talked about, the future more in the past 2 weeks than we did in the past 2 years. And I think that it was just time for something new. And you bring in a guy who has had success, and that gets you excited. And also, I think that it's the success he's had that he's a college basketball guy. Like, we needed to get back to that.
Yes.
It's a guy who was coached at the college. Like,
great point.
We talked about that, I think, when Mike Woodson got hired. One of the concerns, it wasn't just mine, it was a concern of everybody, is NBA guys coming to college basketball don't understand the beast that college basketball is. And there's a reason, a perfect example, Billy Donovan was at Oklahoma City, and he was done there. He could have gone back to college and gotten a 10-year, $100 million contract. No matter what he did, he would have pocketed that money. Like, he could have been terrible and pocketed that money. And even he said, I'm going to go coach a rebuild with the Bulls because the time commitment is so different in the NBA. You get to actually have a life. College basketball, you have to have that college basketball gene. Brad Stevens, Indiana offered him the keys to the kingdom, to make him the highest paid coach in college basketball, put in systems in place where he would not have to deal with any of the college basketball BS that he doesn't want to deal with, gave him everything he wanted. He was on thin ice as the coach of the Celtics at that time as well. And he said, no, I'm good. I'm good here. And again, he moved up to the front office and he's been very successful. So it's worked for him. But when guys are in the NBA, guys from college who leave to go to the NBA typically don't come back unless they don't have other options. Patino, Calipari, those guys didn't have other options. But the guys who do stay there because of the schedule. It is punishing, and you have to know what you're getting into. And guys from the NBA who go from the NBA to college, who've never coached in college before, don't understand it fundamentally. They think they can coach, and that's it, which is what you need in the NBA. It is not what you need in college basketball. On-court coaching is maybe 50% of the job. It's an important part of the job, but it's probably about 50% of it. And so to have a guy who's done that, who we know is done well at it and can build a program and knows what it takes and knows the commitment and time commitment and what it does to you, and is willing to accept going to a place that's even harder at Indiana, that's exciting. Because that's a guy who's walking in knowing what he's doing and knowing what he's walking into. So that's what excites me about Darian DeVries. I mean, there's all the coaching stuff, his offense, his defense, all those things excite me as well. But the fact that he was at a place where he probably could have won 20 to 25 games a year for the next decade and been fine, and decided, no, I see that opportunity and I want that, and decided to leave that and come to Indiana. It says a lot about what he thinks about the job.
Yep. And he's a guy who takes what he has and makes it better than what others do. And that was big at Drake. We've heard about the difference in his wins to the coaches previously, did at West Virginia his year there. If you can get a coach at Indiana that can maximize the resources, I mean, the sky's the limit. Yeah. We all understand that. And so he fits that profile. It's no guarantee that he'll do it. Sometimes guys find out that they hit their head on a certain level and they're not as good at a higher level. Like who's the coach at Akron? John Gross.
Yep.
Right. Was really good as a mid-major guy, came up to the Big Ten. It didn't work. And now he's back. He's at Akron. Right. And he's doing a really good job. Like that's just a great fit for him.
Well,
and maybe DeVries could be that. Like there is a possibility of that. But again, when you have that profile of, and Mike Weemuth for X's and Joe's has done a lot of this, where it's not that DeVries has just exceeded like the kind of standards for the program. He's like broken through the ceiling, and so that's
the turnaround at West Virginia this year alone was remarkable. Yes. And when you look at, they were missing their two best players for most of the season, and they had a bunch of close losses. They could have won 27 games with the right guys. They could have, should have, would have, whatever. But at the same time, they should have been in the NCAA tournament, and they were missing their two best players for most of the season. So I agree. And the other thing I think about, and we've talked about this a lot, is like a guy like Archie, he should have just stayed at Dayton. Like, honest, he didn't know that. Nobody knew that. But like, maybe that was just his place. It's not always just about being able to coach. It's about fit. And it's about all the other stuff that comes along with it. And the thing about Archie is Archie just wants to coach. He doesn't want to do all the other stuff. And, I've said for a long time, when you're, the head coach at Indiana, part of your job is being a politician. It's that way at Kentucky. It's that way at Duke. It's that way at North Carolina. It's that way at Kansas. Like, you've got to go around the state, you've got to do coaching clinics, you've got to barnstorm, you've got to do all those things. Plus, you got to recruit the state. Even if you don't like players, you're not recruiting a player to school. You got to have a good relationship with all the high school coaches. Like, it's this whole thing that's built into being the coach at Indiana. And guys who want to accept that and go after that is somebody that's who I want coaching my team. Not a guy who takes the paycheck, but a guy who wants to do that.
I think that's going to be my hypothesis is that's going to be a little bit less important moving forward.
Probably because you're going to have a GM or something like that. I agree. That's fair.
However, he's already talked to high school coaches, the High School Basketball Coaches Association. He's trying to get up to the state finals. Whether he can or not on Saturday is he's not quite sure. So I'm already reading reports of him contacting AAU coaches in the state. Like, you have to do that, whether it is of less importance or not. You have to, if you have all kinds of recruiting options, you got to have your relationships with all. You can't just pigeonhole into one area of recruiting, even with the NIL and the portal. And if he's already doing that, as well as getting the portal kids, as well as doing that, again, that's a plan. The plan is there. He's got to execute the plan, but the plan is there, which has me happy.
And I think part of it is because, as we've said, he's a ball coach. So I don't know if that stuff is like a chore for him. I think he probably likes it. I think, Ryan, sometimes when people hear, what you've said about, you got to kind of be a politician. And Galen has brought this up a lot, right? Like, the Indiana basketball coach is almost like a religious figure in the state. And even that, I don't think is the same. Yeah. Somewhat. I think that is maybe a little bit lessened now. And I think, because part of it is now recruiting is so much just about the infrastructure that you bring to it. And so I don't think DeVries needs to be able to go viral like John Calipari or be a celebrity like Rick Pitino. I think a lot of his quote unquote political work with fans is going to be based on style and results and the way that his team plays, the kinds of players that he recruits, all those things. And that's going to do most of the selling for him. I don't think the other stuff is quite as necessary as some make it out to be. It's not that it's not important at all, but I think this
it's not
especially right now
for
right. And especially for this fan base right now that is just so starved for competent basketball, I think that's what's going to be the most important part.
The one thing that will be important in that way is we're talking about recruiting and things like that. I know you're talking about the more politician-y side of it, but as far as the recruiting piece, the infrastructure Indiana has, a lot of the top schools have as well, or comparably, with the NIL, with the, the built out staffs, all of that stuff. It's going to be comparable. And so what it's going to come down to for a lot of these kids is relationships. And that's why Indiana, even with the NIL might, in some of these high-profile recruitments under Woodson, they lost out because of relationship building. And a guy like, you hear about Danny Hurley showing up and calling Braylon Mullins all the time, being attached at the hip basically to that kid because he really wanted him. It's true. He showed up at practices. He, did those things, did things that Indiana wasn't doing at the top level. You hear about Matt Painter whenever he gets a top recruit, like, Purdue doesn't have the NIL might,
but I don't think of that as politicking. That's relationship.
No, that's part. But it's you're right. Relationship building. I'm using it as like a big catch-all. Like,
I just I don't care. I don't care if Signetti can go out to center court at Assembly Hall and get everybody eaten out of his hand. I don't care if DeVries can give a rousing speech at Huber's.
No,
that's to me. I don't think that stuff matters at this time for this program.
It's more when I refer to politics. I mean, like, see and be seen. And be a part of
be
the
visible.
Community.
Yes.
Be visible. Like you said, even just showing up, even if he doesn't recruit anyone that's playing at the state tournament, just sit there and eat some popcorn, it's do what other coaches are doing and then build the personal relationship with the guys you want. But yeah, I think I think we have had two coaches who largely stayed in a shell for 8 years, and we can't have that moving forward.
And think about Matt Painter, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but Matt Painter has kind of become like this elder statesman of college basketball. He's eloquent talking about the sport. He'll have clips now that go viral, whether you agree with him or disagree with him, but he's kind of grown into that. I don't remember Matt Painter being like that a while ago.
I mean,
But
I think that his success has made him more visible. So maybe
that's
just
what I
see
mean.
it
And he's
more.
grown
Yeah.
into it.
Probably.
So I don't want to necessarily prejudge, or judge DeVries,
Sure.
because
No,
of things here early on. Like, let him grow into it. It's the other stuff that's going to matter a lot more.
yeah.
We talk about how
Relationship
Archie
building
didn't-
is the important thing.
Yeah, we
It
talk about
really
how, like Archie didn't have the personality, to handle it. But it was really, his failing was just he couldn't actually coach at this level and get the actual results, and was almost standoffish. Like, DeVries isn't that.
No.
He just may not be like the most charismatic guy in the world.
No.
Fine. His team just needs to have some charisma.
Yeah, and that's that part I agree with you 100%. I think that we're talking about similar things but not exactly the same. So I agree with that. And I don't know. I'm excited, and I think that, after especially the last 2 seasons where the talent was there and the execution wasn't, and it was just so disappointing. I think everybody was sort of dragged down a little bummed at where we are. I just think it's time to just wipe the slate clean and build something new in its place, and build something that looks, I wrote that an article for Sports Illustrated about it. It's just that looks forward, that is just, we're about modern basketball and moving forward and embracing this new era and embracing, the new style of play that's come in, and just being, a program that looks forward and not back. And I think that's really important for IU.
But give it time to build.
Of course.
Give it time to build.
Of course.
Yep.
That's a lot of show.
They've had enough, maybe.
Show.
That's a big show. It's a big one. A big
All right,
one.
well, we're going to wrap it up. I think that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights. Well, not on Thursday nights, whenever we want, for any live broadcast of Assembly Call Radio. Thanks to Bob Thompson for producing our music, and thanks to John Rieger of rigdesign.com for designing our logos. Thanks to Eddie behind the scenes on the 1 and 2s producing the show.
Yeah.
And thank you for staying with us to see Ryan come back and speak. We appreciate all of you. Go Hoosiers. Until then.
Take it from me, Yogi Ferrell. Keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim. And go Hoosiers.
That's it. We're done. No more questions. I think they've gotten enough show.
Here I come. This is Don Sony.
Now, I met with the team. There is no team.
That's a great line.
I tried to cue Eddie up in my rant for that one, and it came. It just took a second. You have to listen. We can maybe cut that down, the time between in post.
Oh man.
So
Jerod, I gotta say, I don't know if anybody else has noticed this, but Jerod sounds like a different person now that we have a new coach. And I'm not blaming that on Wood. You sound very excited. I love it. I love hearing old Jerod.
It's, it's funny, Coach. You talked about how, your kind of reaction, was really to feel apathetic and you kind of disengage some. And I definitely did at the beginning of the season. Everybody kind of dealt with last season in such a different way. And for me, I spent so much time trying to think about, how we approach season number 3, things we said, things I would do again, things I wouldn't do again. And, I think everybody needs to think about this. What do I want my personal relationship to this program to be? And if I'm going to speak about it publicly, what do I want that tone to be? And I just don't want to be a voice of negativity. Like, even if there are, again, you can talk about basketball. We can criticize basketball and have honest conversations about basketball, but about the program and the people in it, I would just rather say nothing in public than be negative about it. I just don't want to do it. I don't think it serves a purpose, and I don't think we need to do that. I think what I ended up realizing is, as much as I was dissatisfied with how year 3 went and my frustrations with Mike Woodson, I really ended up being kind of frustrated with how I handled them and how that got expressed. And I wanted to get back to, how things felt in the begining, and how I've always felt as a fan. So,
and I think, I told you guys before the year, I said, this is going to one of 2 ways. Either they're going to have a magical run because they're so talented, or we're going to have a fresh start. And either way, it's going to be exciting. The path to get there might not be exciting, but the result will be exciting. And right now I'm excited, man. This is our 4th head coach since doing this show, but, but it is the one, this is the coaching change I think makes the most sense. I thought Archie was a good hire. We all did, but there's something about this that feels less of a 180, like it's going to take a couple years. And I think DeVries can build, but I think with the NIL might and who he is as a coach, they can be competitive year one. I don't, not for a national championship, but they can be a tournament team in year one. Not saying it's going to happen. We'll see. But I didn't necessarily feel that way about Archie. I thought he's going to rebuild this in a gritty, like bottom up way because it was such a different style than Crean. And so I'm very excited about what he brings. Is he a national championship winning coach who's coming to Indiana? No, but he's a guy who's well respected. He's really smart and he can get it done. And people believe he can get it done, and people believe that it's a really good hire. So I'm on board fully, and I can't wait to get into it. I can't wait to talk about it this offseason. I can't wait to do post-game shows about it. Have something fun and new to break down.
Hey, on a positive note, I met with Assembly Call listener today. He wants to start a bracketology club at his school.
Which school?
In Lafayette. He's texting me right now. So Zach, if you're still listening, awesome. At Benton Central, we met for 2 hours today, and I went over all the bracketology stuff, and he wanted for me to share that he loves watching and has been watching for a long time. So it is amazing how many people we reach and don't know and who listen. So
one question,
shout out to
Coach.
Zach.
One question, Coach. Are you going to be really mad when you help him set up his bracketology group and they beat you in the bracket matrix?
No, it's going to –
because that's what Andy did with you.
Yeah, exactly. Andy forgave me. No, I will be very happy when the Benton Central bracketology group beats us. I'm actually hoping that before I retire, I can get a league going and get 8 to 10 schools locally. Awesome. And then when I retire, monitor it from home and run a website and have them send stuff to me. And since I won't be involved directly in 3 years or so when I retire, if I can, knock on wood. Awesome. So he's kind of my first expansion, but it all came from us here at Assembly Call and his love for Indiana, and so that's pretty cool.
How did you guys do this year?
We scored our third highest ever, 361 points, and finished 81st out of 249.
Dang.
Yeah. But so we put Indiana in.
Oh, yeah, the new rankings.
Listen, we put Indiana in. That was wrong. Cost us 6 points. It was down to North Carolina, Indiana, and we missed it. That was 6 points. And we flipped Purdue and Wisconsin 4 and 5, 20 minutes before we turned in our bracket. Those two things cost us 10 points. If we would have gotten those 10 points, we finished 10th.
Dang.
That's how tight it was.
How did Andy finish?
He had 360. He was right behind us.
Okay. So you guys were about the same. My old colleague, Jason List, hanging on one spot above Delphi Bracketology. He had 364 this year. Good for Jason. He's a good guy. I mean, I was rooting for you, Coach, but still.
Again, when you score your third best ever.
Oh, yeah. That's great.
We can't play defense, right? We can't go out and, guard the 3-point line.
Well, did you have West Virginia in?
We had West Virginia in, yes. We actually moved them down. We moved them down from a 9 seed to the last 10 seed. We just didn't keep moving them down enough in our final discussion.
I mean, they should have been in, quite frankly. Like,
you can start floating stuff, though. Like if you feel real strongly that one team is in, you guys are kind of trend makers now in bracketology. So you could say, I think maybe this team is being underseeded, even if you don't think that they are, and start to mess with people's minds a little bit.
Has Mark Titus had you guys on the show yet? Because that's got to happen.
No, he keeps talking about us all the time.
Yeah,
I catch a couple clips every once in a while.
We got to reach out to him next year. Like
it was.
I did. I texted him. I told him that
he said in one of his clips,
he
said. He said Ohio State wasn't in last week. Now they're in this week. They must have listened to us bitch. And then he said, my principal said we could do this. He said, can we get these guys on the show and bring them up to Chicago? And I showed my principal the clip, and he said, yeah, sure. I'm like, okay, it's Barstool. They got Jägermeister on the set
field
right
trip
there.
to Barstool, Chicago.
That show is fine.
Put that on my
good luck getting the parents to sign that permission.
Honestly, the Chicago office is a little different than the other one. But Jerod, we should have him on, talk about DeVries at some point. We should see if we can get him on.
Yeah.
Love having him.
All right. Hey, I got to go do something.
Yeah. We got to go
get some sleep, take some medicine, do something. It's been a long.
Thanks for hosting, show. Coach. It was
Hey, that's okay. And I think we probably need to do a few of these as we get coaching staffs and rosters.
Agreed.
And so if you need me to put the run sheet together, I don't know if I do a good job or not, but I can type a little bit. And
Jerod, we'll just start it after bedtime, man. People are going to be here.
Yeah, we can start it later too.
I know, just trying to be respectful of those in the Eastern time zone. But
all right, guys.
All right, everybody.
We'll
Thanks,
do more.
Eddie. Behind the scenes,
Bye,
Eddie did a good job with those clips. That really
Great
added.
show, fellas.
Appreciate it.
As always.
All right, y'all.
Good night, everybody.